Monkey is the classic English translation of the story Journey to the West by Arthur Waley. And Journey to the West is the greatest story/folktale in all of Chinese history. If not that, then it's by at least the most ubiquitous. And let's be real here. This story deserves all of the praise that it gets. I will not mince words here. This is top-tier fiction, and this was an absolute blast to read. Now, when I decided to read Journey to the West, the first thing you have to do is decide which version of the story you're going to read, because there are so many of them. And like I said, I did choose this one because it is the classic English translation of the story. Also, I chose it because it is abridged. Because it's either pretty much you have two choices. It's either this or the 100% unabridged version, which is like 1,200 pages long. Then I also like the way that he chose to abridge this. He took the beginning and the end of the story and translated them in full. Then there's the entire middle section of the story, which is like 100 different stories that basically add up to being like the Monster of the Week stories. They don't really tie into each other, have anything to do with each other. There's a little bit of overlap from my understanding, but not necessarily, one doesn't necessarily hinge on the other. So what he did was he took 3 of those stories and he translated those in full again, and he put them in the middle of the beginning and the end, and he called that Monkey. Like I said, the only other version is like the full uncut version, which is like 1,200 pages long. And I don't know if that would have been a better experience to read all of that content in the middle, or if it would have just ended up feeling tedious. I don't know. I haven't read the other version. I've only read this one. But then, to be fair, I don't feel like I missed that much as far as what the story was supposed to be in terms of the overarching story and the overarching idea and message and themes that you were supposed to get from it. The little minutia that you're going to get from the individual stories, of course, are missing, but I think that grand big picture was pretty much untainted, as far as I can tell, from having not read the other version. But then again, is there even a point to all those little stories that happen along the way? Because apparently philosophers can't even agree on that. There are some scholars who absolutely scold Waley for cutting out all of that content, saying that he missed all of the morals and the allegory baked into those stories. And then there's the Chinese philosopher who basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, said, "These stories are just a bit of good comedic fun. Don't read too much into them." So apparently, like I said, philosophers can't even agree on what the Journey to the West is supposed to be. Anyway, with all that out of the way, what's the actual story here? Well, this is the story of Sun Wukong, or as he's referred to in this book, simply Monkey. And the entire introduction is dedicated 100% to Monkey. And it will eventually expand to include 3 other members of the 4-member group that will eventually go on the actual Journey to the West. But even then, Monkey is by far the star of the show here. And he is a magical being that is born out of a stone. He then very quickly goes on to become the king of the monkeys and lead the monkeys to their new home on the mountain of fruit and flowers. Despairing then that he will eventually grow old and die one day, Monkey leaves the mountain to go off in search of immortality. And let me tell you, this whole introduction to Monkey is probably the best part of the entire book, or at the very least, my favorite part of the book, because Jesus Christ, Monkey is a terrible little shit. He is horrible. He's awful. He's portrayed as like a trickster and a jokester. He's obnoxious. He's annoying. He's rude. He is literally the trickster to end all tricksters. He would be just the worst if you ever met him in real life. You wouldn't want to have anything to do with him ever. I think he's supposed to come across as like a playful joker, but he really just comes across as insufferable and literally terrorizes every single person that he ever comes across in the entire story. He does eventually find a teacher who takes him on as a student, and it is here that he does eventually learn the secret to immortality. He also learns how to fly on a cloud and learns the secret to the 72 transformations. And he does all of this right before he gets kicked out for bad behavior. And I will say, in this section, for as badly behaved as he is, he actually shows more discipline and dedication to learning than any of the other students. Like, when he is taught something or given a secret, this is what you need to do to learn the secret of the somersault on clouds or whatever it was called. And whereas the other students go to bed for the night, Sun Wukong will not rest until he has practiced and practiced and practiced and learned the secret of flying on a cloud. When it comes to the transformations, the students will rest. Wukong will not rest until he has achieved the learning and the mastery of the skill that he has dedicated himself to at that second in time. So his devotion to learning just far surpasses anybody else's in the story. Also, this is a section of the story where he gets his name in religion, which is Sun Wukong, or what translates into English as either awakened to emptiness or aware of vacuity. In my version, it's aware of vacuity, which I like way more because it's just a lot funnier, and that the fact that it's funnier fits the tone of the story better. I don't know. Anyway, after getting kicked out of here, he goes on to strong-arm the Dragon Kings into giving him a magical staff and a set of magical gold armor. Then after that, he goes on to fuck things up in heaven twice. In between those two times, he tries to go back to the mountain of fruit and flowers, but heaven constantly sends people down there to collect him and bring him back, and he just keeps destroying everybody heaven can send at him. He just stomps them all into the ground because he's at this point become so powerful, nobody can even contend with him, at which point they do eventually coax him back to heaven by giving him a title, which is the Great Sage Equal of Heaven. He then, of course, goes on to eat all of the peaches of immortality in the garden. He ends up ultimately being immortal 4 or 5 times over by the end of this story. It's kind of ridiculous. Every time there is something that could possibly cause immortality, he's all over it. But anyway, he ultimately rages so far out of control that Buddha himself steps in, takes Monkey, and imprisons him under a mountain for 500 years. Like I said, this is by far the best part of the story, or at least my favorite. Now, as soon as that's over, we get the introduction of all the rest of the characters that are going to go on the journey to the west in a much more rapid-fire order than we did for Monkey. He's the only one who really gets an extended backstory. But then the main traveler is Tripitaka, who is a Buddhist monk who is chosen to be the one to make the journey to the west, which is a journey to India in order to collect sacred scriptures in order to bring them back to China. This then enters the center portion, or the journey, which is also the section that was so heavily abridged by Waley. But like I said, I don't feel like the main overarching story is lost here. I really feel like this is essentially a journey of enlightenment. And with the beginning and the end, the middle is not necessarily the most important part to get the most out of this story. You are, of course, going to lose those little mini moral stories of those little individual episodes, but I don't know if that's the most important part, or if there even are moral stories in there at all, if you're going to listen to Who She. But anyway, for me at the very least, this ended up being a journey of enlightenment, and that enlightenment was for the Monkey King. He ends up throughout this journey learning discipline and restraint, all while never losing his personality, that core that makes him who he is, or his sense of humor, or his sense of adventure, or his just sense of, I don't even know. He immediately comes out from underneath that punishment of being under the mountain for 500 years, acting way better, but then he still gets this metal band on his head that Tripitaka can use to kind of keep him under control as the story goes along, and he just continues to mature and evolve as the story goes along. And like I said, never losing that sense of playfulness that is the Monkey King. And if there's one thing I really took away from this, it was just how much fun it was to read. The characters were so much fun. The story was so much fun. The humor holds up shockingly well from a story that was written in the year 1600. Although I don't know how much of that is to be attributed to Waley for his translation. Although I don't know how much there is in this that the translator really has to affect in the humor. I'm sure there is some. But at the same time, I think it's also just because this story is great. It is just so much fun to read. And of course, the Monkey King is just great. He's just the best. He ends up being like one of the most OP fictional, like folktale characters I've ever read in my entire life. And also somehow simultaneously being like the most pesky little shit that you would never ever want to know or meet ever. All while being one of the most thoroughly entertaining characters of old folktale that I've ever read. And I'm sure I will at some point have to go out and get the 1200-page version of this and just slowly work my way through it, if for no other reason than to just spend a little bit more time with Sun Wukong. Anyway, as always, everybody, the link for my Patreon's in the description below. The link for my Discord's in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.